Welcome to Life by Design, episode 402. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Cracio Jug.
Happy to be here, as always.
We are creators of Life by Design with many locations worldwide. Each week on the show, we discuss the principles and the practice of Life by Design. And today, when it's not a concussion. Interesting article, Cracio, looking at the differences between a concussion, meaning an injury to the brain, versus injuries to the cervical spine structures that have a lot of the same wiring and, of course, lead to a lot of the same symptomatological outcomes, which makes it a little bit difficult to differentiate between the two. A side note before we start commenting, I just want to note that pretty amazing. This is, I want to say, episode 402. Now, it depends when I go look up and do the upload, but that's a lot of episodes, Cracio.
I think all time it's got to be over 500 because we had a big, that didn't even get
that's right. At least
a
couple hundred for sure. So we're probably on episode 600 if I was to take a wild stab. But yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, good stuff, man. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been a trip. So talking about the structures, tell us a bit about the study that you had built this episode off, and then we can break down some of the important details.
Yep. So, I mean, listen, the main point is this, concussions they're serious. They're getting a lot of attention lately, especially in the sports world. And, with that comes being able to differentiate, concussions and potentially other things, because I think if it's been a while since I've read the study, and I think I always say that every week, but the difficulty is some people respond really slow to treatment, and the classic concussion is thought of as brain trauma or shearing forces to the brain. And now they're starting to see that they called it cervicogenic, which just kills me as a corrective chiropractor. But movement issues with the neck can mimic concussion-like symptoms, and it's just interesting when clinically we have seen the exact same thing in practice with many, many cases.
Well, in the study, it talked about the number of estimated concussions, and I'm not sure if this was worldwide or in the United States, but I'm guessing probably worldwide given the number, but hey, who knows? It was almost 4 million concussions.
It's crazy.
And yeah, I mean, obviously the numbers are rising. And if, like anything, without getting into specific details here, the more you test something, the more your numbers are going to rise as well. And so the same is going to be true with concussions and anything.
I don't know what you're referencing there.
Yeah, well, I'm just talking about concussions. Is all I'm talking about.
Of course.
But the more you measure something, the more you're going to see it increase. So, whether that's we're seeing a rise in concussions or whether we're just doing better at measuring and diagnosing, hard to say. Nonetheless, I think it's really interesting that they've started to differentiate between a concussion and cervical spine injuries, because I know lots of patients that have come in through our practices who have had concussions or been diagnosed as concussions. Every case is different, but it's amazing how some people respond versus other people who've been told they have the same condition. And, starting to look at, well, how much of this condition has to do with the neck and injuries to the structures in the neck, and how much of this is, specifically due to the brain and injuries to the brain.
Well, they even noted at it's almost like a footnote, but they noticed that regardless of the diagnosis, if they differentiated between a cervicogenic problem or not, that people who are, having they use the term treatment, I just don't like the terminology, but they're saying who have their neck treated for cervicogenic problems respond faster, respond quicker by like 8 weeks or something.
Right. Well, we know that there's an intimate connection between the brain and the cervical spine. So I think most people who think about the anatomy, they think about, I've got my head and then I've got my neck, and they're two separate structures. And of course, most people recognize that there's a spinal cord that connects the two. At least I hope you recognize there's a spinal cord that connects the two. Some days people probably feel like their head's not connected, but it is. And there is a cord in there that is feeding and receiving information. The other component that is more difficult to grasp, for the layperson, maybe without the anatomical background, I can only speak to my own experience. It's not something I really was aware of prior to study, but that, there's a massive amount of neural receptors in the actual joints in and around the spinal column, as well as other parts of your body. And that the role of those receptors is to feed information back to the brain. So it's not just, there's a cord in there, but there's all kinds of wiring that's happening. And when the spine moves and it moves more optimally, there's a positive feedback system that's helping the brain recover. And I think this is where, when you're fixing or correcting injuries to the cervical spine, even if the primary problem was brain, you would have a benefit to that. And I think that's the take home is, regardless, you may have to do some specifics for brain recovery. And I mean, there's some great, there's some great professionals out there who can do that. Regardless, you should be having your cervical spine analyzed and properly corrected, just because it's something that's going to benefit you concussion wise and just general health wise.
Yeah. So that was a great description of chiropractic without, I think some old school docs would be really proud of your modern explanation of what the science is actually telling us that's happening. And B, 2020 has taught me that when we're talking about science, we cannot take for granted that the obvious things are, that people understand the obvious things, because we really need to be more clear, I think, when we're interpreting science and data, that some of the things that you think smart people would get automatically, they don't get.
Yeah, well, common sense isn't necessarily common practice, and the way that you think, or I think, or you, the listener, thinks isn't always going to be the way somebody else thinks. And, you're going to take things not necessarily for granted, but you're going to assume that the obvious is obvious. As you said, Cratio, it's not always obvious. So I think having clear conversations with people about, what it is that you're either trying to explain or get somebody else to understand, lots of value in going through the basics, which is actually a good reminder as a healthcare provider that, for people listening in, for patients, prospective patients, starting at ABC is always a great place to start. And it is actually a great place to start when you look at improving your health. And I think a lot of people just in general skip ahead, or if they feel like they're more advanced with health. And if you were to look back, I think a lot of times people skip, very fundamental pieces. And to tie it back in, the cervical spine is a fundamental piece. So whether you have a concussion or have been diagnosed with a concussion, yeah, you may need to look at the brain, and there are other avenues, but I think you'd be remiss if you didn't actually look at the cervical spine to make sure that the problem there was also corrected and addressed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what you said is bang on. And if we're going back to basics, basics for healthy neurology is proper movement of all the joints, right? So I think just being able to move and focusing on movement is something that is, 101 health.
Yeah, and this is another analogy, I guess, and I picked this up from Kelly Starrett, Supple Leopard, if anybody's read that book. It's solid, and I always I like the concept of organization. He talks about organizing the spine, actually, and I always felt like that made a lot of sense in terms of improving optimal function, leads to a certain level of organization. And he was talking, I believe, more about structure and alignment and movement. But again, there's neurological organization that comes along with correcting those dysfunctions as well. And kind of leads us to the last point, which is just highlights the importance of an examination. And I mean, we could talk about this all day. This is the one thing that is so often missed with many healthcare providers. And we've really kind of hung our hats on it over the course of the last decade and beyond. And that's don't guess, test, right? Have some type of analysis system that gives you repeatable information so you can apply an intervention and then go back and retest again and confirm that intervention had a positive impact.
Yep. I totally agree with that.
Great. And you know what, that applies everywhere. And we've been doing a lot more, maybe a podcast, actually, Cratio, coming up. I've been doing a lot of work in using blood glucose testing for myself.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And then we just launched a whole test project within our practice. And we've got, I want to say, almost 70 people joining the test project. So we got quite a little study going on inside the Facebook community and the practice. And it's interesting because I set myself up as a provider for the company. So I just ordered 70 test kits and they actually sent them. I'm like,
cool.
Okay, sounds good. I'm not sure when that's going to get red flagged, but for now, we're able to provide all the test kits for all the patients. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to collect that data and then come back and report to it here on one of the podcasts in the future.
Cool, that's awesome. Yeah, write it up, man.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. So we'll put a link to the article in here. You can check that out. But the take-home message is don't guess test. Get your spine examined, whether you had a concussion or not a concussion. It's a fundamental piece of the puzzle, and it's really a core part of the Life by Design blueprint. Thank you, as always, for joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.